Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Foley's Telemedicine Doing Business in China conference. Today's call is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Mr. Nate Lackman. Please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nate Lackman. I'm a partner with Foley and Lardner, and I'd like to welcome you to our conference, Telemedicine Doing Business in China. Before we start, and as we have more participants join us, let's go over a couple housekeeping tips. Our program will run for 1 hour and will apply for a general CLE credit. New York, New Jersey, and Kansas attendees must fill out the attorney affirmation form you can get in the materials link and write down the secret course code that we will share at some point in time during this conference. Everyone can submit electronic questions throughout the broadcast by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We also have a live Q&A session that's optioned for you at the end of the web conference. And finally, in connection with our firm's telemedicine efforts, we have a telemedicine provider survey that's going on right now, and if you'd like, you can complete that survey form, and afterward you will have a copy of our analysis of the survey findings. That said, let's start. China itself represents a market with enormous potential value for telemedicine. We see technological advances driving increased demand for telemedicine services in China, particularly in fields that support China's underserved primary or secondary hospital facilities in rural areas, such as radiology, pathology, and expert consults. China's healthcare sector continues to grow at an exponential rate, and their government views telemedicine as essential to their healthcare delivery systems. Therefore, we see among healthcare providers in the U.S. and other countries that opportunities in China telemedicine abound. On August 29th of this year, China's National Health and Family Planning Commission published a set of opinions regarding telemedicine in China. These opinions represent the first official telemedicine guidance published since the former Ministry of Health's brief but notable document in 1999 titled Notice on Strengthening the Administration of Telemedicine Consultation. These new 2014 opinions represent a significant step forward in China adoption of telemedicine, but they do contain certain specific expectations and requirements for providers. We see that U.S. providers seek guidance not only on the nitty-gritty of China law and regulation, but really also on business approaches and solutions that will help them more easily embrace this opportunity and provide telemedicine in China. With that in mind, we've assembled a panel of speakers who can share their perspectives on telemedicine in China. Our first speaker, Jun Liu, will offer the VC Accelerator perspective with an emphasis on telemedicine hardware and software companies. Mr. Liu is currently the Vice President at Vesalius Ventures, a VC accelerator focused on telemedicine, mHealth, and digital health. The firm also provides international business advisory services for helping U.S. companies navigate challenging business issues overseas, and he brings significant experience in the healthcare industry in the China sector, currently serving several U.S.-based healthcare companies to develop the China market entry strategy and China corporate clients to identify investment and business opportunities in telemedicine here in the U.S. After completing his undergrad studies at Nanjing University, Mr. Liu received his MBA from Rice and his master's in biomedical science from the University of Texas. We also have with us today Peter Kung, who brings the U.S.-based provider perspective with existing China telemedicine arrangement. Peter Kung serves jointly as the Director of Strategic Technologies for UCLA Health and the UCLA Institute for Innovation in Health. He is the Director of Innovative Technologies at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. Prior to that, he served on a U.S. congressional-funded initiative as the Director of Informatics at the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress. Mr. Kung received his BA from UC Irvine, his Master's in Information Systems and Technology from Claremont Graduate University, and his MBA from the Anderson School of Management at, you guessed it, UCLA. Finally, rounding out the panel is Tad Ferris, and Tad will offer the China legal and regulatory considerations for international arrangements. As the co-chair of Foley and Lardner's Greater China practice, Tad's work focuses on international and Chinese legal issues. In the healthcare sector in China, for example, he advised on projects involving labor force, communicable disease testing, regulatory compliance, and international China telemedicine project compliance and strategic development. After earning his master's degree from George Washington University, Tad went to law school in China and then also went to law school in the U.S., graduating from Duke with his law degree and a master's of international law earned from studying at the Free University of Brussels. Fluent in 5 languages, Tad has served as a consultant for UN organizations and testified before Asian legislatures on issues related to the implementation of national and local legislation. In that effort, he serves as a bridge between U.S.-based businesses and China-based businesses to close the gap. So with that in mind, let's start out with June. Maybe you can tell us about Vesalius's involvement with telemedicine in China.
Sure. As Nate mentioned, Vesalius is a Houston-based VC accelerator with primary focus in telemedicine, mobile health, and digital health. And over the years, the company's business model has evolved, and we now also provide advisory services, mainly focused on international markets such as China and Middle East. And we see China as a very interesting market in terms of telemedicine and mobile health compared to the U.S. market, and we still see China is still in its infant stage in terms of telemedicine and mobile health. However, in the past 2 years, and we see this market is getting into this very fast track of growth, and we believe there's a lot of opportunities not only for U.S. companies and healthcare providers to get into that market as well, and a lot of Chinese companies are also looking for international partnership with U.S. providers and the U.S.-based telemedicine and mobile health companies. So we see we can play a very significant role by facilitate the business transaction.
So tell us more about why China.
So as you all know, China has 1.3 billion population, and over the 30 years, the economy in China has been growing in a very fast pace. However, in terms of all the infrastructure, the whole healthcare infrastructure, and it has been lagging behind the economic development. Now the government has put a very strong emphasis on developing the social, welfare network, including the healthcare. Now, however, because of the span of the size of the countries, there's a lot of unequal healthcare resources. Most of the high-end or good healthcare quality facilities are all concentrated in those large cities, and the rural areas has over the past 50 years, the healthcare infrastructure hasn't been developed and catch up, and we see these applications for telemedicine. And also, our strategies, offers to, for the U.S. companies to explore, and with a very strong support from the regional government, and we have been very focused on our sectors, in terms of, telemedicine company, mobile health, and we emphasize on helping the small and medium-sized companies for navigate the international business environment, because over the years, we have seen, the struggles, for those small and medium-sized companies. They are interested in explore internationally, but because of the constraints, those companies has. So, it's quite difficult for them to explore overseas. So we see Vesalius as a business partners, for those organizations, to help them to establish business opportunities in China.
Now, Peter, can you tell us a little bit about UCLA's telemedicine arrangements in China?
Absolutely. And first, thank you, Nate, for putting this on. And second, what I'd like to do before getting into what UCLA Health is doing in China, I'd like to give some background because it's going to really provide some color and context with my comments. So as an academic medical center at UCLA, our mission is to deliver patient care, research, and education. Our vision is to heal humankind one patient at a time by improving health, alleviating suffering, and delivering acts of kindness. And what you see on the screen right now is our operating statistics in 2012. And it wasn't because I'm lazy that I couldn't do the 2014, but I wanted to point out two very specific things that really provide some context of strategies of how we enter the China market. As an academic medical center, it's not unique to us, but more rare is first the clinics. When we're talking about the clinics there is all academic medical centers are known for their tertiary and quaternary care, just like UCLA. But more rare is we also have a large primary care network with over 150 offices or clinics out in our community. So we have both strategies at play in that sense. One, a population health strategy, and also a tertiary and quaternary care strategy. At times, if you're going to bring out, if you really try to really expand out these two strategies, sometimes they may seem like they're in conflict, but I believe, and I think UCLA believes, that if you position these two strategies together in a way, it can actually be complementary. The second thing that I'd like to point out on this slide is our percent occupancy. 2 years ago, we were roughly hanging around 90%, above 90%, and sometimes we go a little above 100. However, today we're talking about we are 110 census. This is actually amazing, but at the same time, something that we got to take into consideration, that our inpatient capacity is at a maximum. So I think those two things I wanted to point out in terms of additional future comments that I'll be making. So the business or telemedicine business that we're conducting in China, we were very thoughtful and very meticulous of how we enter this market. And really it started many years ago, roughly 7 to 10 years ago, through our teaching mission. Our, at that time, chief medical officer and our dean on the school side, really we set a partnership with Zhejiang University, with the president there, and really doing some education exchange in part of our teaching mission. In fact, the relationship got so advanced that Zhejiang University incorporated much of our course curriculum into their medical course curriculum. One thing that we did implant inside there was actually our pathology specialties. And this would be a physician-to-physician consult, more of image exchange. We would actually have our professors and our faculty go out to China, teach the faculty there in terms of the testing and the procedures and the lab and the quality of that setup. And actually today, if you, from last time I spoke with one of the vice chairs of pathology, they're doing 5 times more in terms of the population of patients than what we're doing here, which is amazing, one, because of what June just mentioned, the population growth there and the demand. And I think that's really, we like to, I think it's a great accomplishment on our behalf that the population, the community around, that we set the initial efforts, that community is, I wouldn't say thriving, but improving. From there, we also embedded telemedicine within the pathology lab to do actually biweekly calls. And this is throughout the years, and it really has matured in terms of the sophistication and the cases and the complexity of the patient cases being presented. And so that is actually happening to this day. What just recently happened was a joint venture using our experience of pathology. The UC system partnered with CTI to create a clinical lab for pathology. We will, UCLA, be looking at the oversight and the clinical and quality, while they'll be providing the marketing and the capital. At the same time, we would be leveraging our previous experience in pathology in terms of consultations and in teaching in terms of the cases being presented. That today is our experience with telemedicine in China.
Thanks, Peter. You touched on a lot of issues there that UCLA itself has dealt with and addressed. But maybe you could just discuss in general, what are some of the business steps and considerations that another U.S.-based healthcare provider who would be looking at telemedicine in China, what should they consider when assessing a potential China telemedicine opportunity?
Absolutely. And thank you for switching to the screen. So UCLA, our vision for telehealth is that when appropriate, we could deliver quality healthcare regardless of geographic location. And sometimes we have all these different vocabulary, telehealth, telemedicine, mHealth, I mean, you name it, right? So what we're seeing is this broad view that the audience is seeing. We have everything from the left, the episodic disease treatment, remote hospital monitoring. This is everything I think a lot of the audience members have been participating in terms of remote ICU, things like that. We do have the remote providers, video conferencing, store and forward, which I think a lot of folks are very comfortable with. And I think there's a push to the remote home monitoring side, and we will probably get more into it, what the opinions say about this and where they're concentrating on. But going back to what I first explained in terms of the strategy, our tertiary and quaternary care and primary care strategy, I think when you're entering China, you have to really understand your strategy must be your true north. Now, I'm going to give an example of that. If UCLA, we are, not if, we're at 110% capacity, meaning we're filled to the brim. When we enter China then, are we looking just for more patients in that respect, right? Because that might be a different play if your hospital is at 50 to 60% utilized. Then you're just looking for the patients. But for our tertiary and quaternary care and the fact that we're filled to the brim, it really presents us a different scenario that you really have to segment China in terms of where you want to go and then position yourself to those specialties or to that demand. I mean, I think China presents itself as a massive market with a lot of different demand that you could really play with. But I think as UCLA, when we're entering China, and we're doing, say, right now, currently with pathology, we're really touching like the video conferencing and store and forward part, remember, with the pathology reads, and then our biweekly calls, doing some case consultation. That's where we're positioning ourselves. But that's where we position. The segment that we're doing is completely different from different hospital systems depending on your strategy, your utilization, and the specialties that you have in terms of the assets you have as a hospital system.
I like that you have it tied in with what your particular vision is and for your needs of your client. This question would be for June then. June, I mean, you have with Vesalius, you work with a slightly different segment of telemedicine providers than Peter, whereas UCLA may be more focused on the service-based telemedicine. A lot of the companies that you work with are equipment or software developers and providers. So from that angle, what have you seen are the most successful or viable business approaches that those type of U.S. companies could take when doing telemedicine in China?
Yeah, so I would like to answer that question from two perspectives. Just by echoing what Peter just said, the first one would be for U.S. providers. And for those U.S. providers, I think the best and the most successful approach for getting into the China market is form a direct relationship with your counterpart. So what I mean counterpart are those hospitals or university-affiliated medical schools or hospitals in China. So that probably would be more appropriate for U.S. hospitals. And then on the second part would be private companies. And for private companies, we also would like to, from two perspectives. First would be for those large corporations. And typically the most successful approach for those large corporations would be for a direct approach. When I say direct approach, which means, they have a full team working on the ground and they develop opportunities, and there are pros and cons. So, for those, direct approach, you have more control on what you're going to accomplish. But however, it requires a lot of finance and human resources, which means you need to be patient and you need to have a long-term goals and also the business development strategy for tackling the market. And then for those small and medium-sized companies, which we are interested the most at Vesalius, are forming a partnership. Do your homework first in the U.S., maybe find some expert, for the China market, and then, form a partnership with a Chinese company. Can be either a hardware or software company, but the partnership will be very critical for the success of those small and medium-sized business to get into another completely new market.
And June, on this slide, are these some examples of entities that you've either worked with or are familiar with?
Sure. I would just give you examples. We have been working with a Houston-based cardiac monitoring service provider in the U.S. It's one of the largest here in the States. So we have been working with the company for about a year and a half. And, the approach, for this company, as I said earlier, so we help the companies to identify a potential partner on the ground. And at the same time, we actually, roll up our sleeves and actually execute the strategies we have been laid out for the company, which means we went there and to talk with the, the potential interesting partners in China. And also we bring the potential Chinese collaborators here to come back to the U.S. to visit the companies. And also we bring the management team of the U.S. companies to go to the ground, go to China and visit the companies and also they're affiliated. I think this is also very important. When you approach potential partners in China, you would also like to learn, who they are doing business with, who are their clients, who are the suppliers. If it's hardware, where to manufacture their device or product. If you have a complete picture of your partner, your potential partner, which can give you a great confidence that whether the other parties can be a good business partner or not. So that's kind of examples we had for working with U.S.-based telemedicine companies to establish a business partnership with the Chinese companies. So for example, we invited the Chinese company to come over here and they signed a strategic partnership agreement in March, and then immediately those two companies moved into the phases of working on real projects. So in the past few months, so I've been facilitated the communication between those two companies to working on that real project. So which from our perspective is kind of for establishing this type of partnership is kind of very quick because it takes them less than a year to actually identify the partner and also have a real project going on.
Thanks, Jun. Let's move to Ted. Ted, you actually prepared the document translating the Chinese opinions into English for the attendees today, and I'd remind everyone that it's available both in your registration packet, and you can also access it online, foley.com/telemedicine. And we'll discuss the opinions in a moment, but Ted, maybe you can just give us a brief overview of the Chinese regulatory approach and how it differs from approaches here in the U.S.
Sure, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And for those of you who might have taken leave from their usual China National Day holidays, which are extending through tomorrow, China time, thanks for that as well. In terms of the China regulatory approach, and again, for those who've been deep in China regulatory programs for a while, excuse me while I give more of a 10,000-foot overview. But essentially, I wanted to identify some key points based on my experiences over the past couple of decades or so on a number of regulatory regimes, including with respect to the evolving telemedicine program. First, basically, is that a regulatory measure that comes out in 2014, and indeed essentially released to the public just last month, is extremely new. And why is that important? Because newness in terms of a regulation or other regulatory measure in China means that certain issues, certain government issuance of further details and refinements may be something that is ongoing for a number of months following the release of the measure to a number of years. That doesn't mean, however, that for some of our priority issues we won't be able to get better certainty and manage our risks appropriately in a nearer term. It just means that as an outset we should expect that this thing will be evolving for some time. The other key characteristic I wanted to flag was clearly there's a, excuse for the use of the term clearly, but there's a tendency toward ambiguity in the text. Essentially, talking with the law drafters and a number of agencies on this, this basically enhances their regulatory opportunity for interpretation, gives them the most flexibility. That can be frustrating to us on the regulated community side, but it's not unknown in the China regulatory experience. You have authorities essentially without the term limits that we may be accustomed to outside of China, particularly in the U.S., and less of a, let's say, public servant role. Therefore, maximizing their ability to react to particular fact patterns, et cetera, is something that they want to retain. And sometimes that means that text is more ambiguous than we would prefer. Also, I would note, and this is increasing of late in China, but there's a tendency towards conservative approaches, at least in the outset with respect to these new measures. This arises from basically the fact that their colleagues who take on an enforcement side of the agency function, in this case with telemedicine, that being the National Health and Family Planning Commission, they're accustomed to noncompliance. And when day-to-day you see noncompliance, and I'm not talking about our companies, but I'm talking about the folks that they see out there, the ones with basically no compliance functions inside to monitor that aspect of operations. You know, when they see that day-to-day, they become more conservative, and they tend to assume noncompliance or assume guilt until innocence is proven. That can also be challenging, but just to understand that as you go into these kind of measures helps you anticipate some of the issues that we need to work through. The other thing which is evident, and also particularly with respect to the telemedicine opinions we're talking about, is that there are in China with these regulatory programs a tendency to go about a phased approach to issuing the laws. So you won't get the whole package of related regulatory measures, related guidance, interpretive measures, that kind of thing that may eventually unfold over that period I had mentioned at the outset. You'll get one. In this case, we have opinions. You know, the last issuance on this of great significance was that 1999 notice. But that doesn't mean this is the end. That means that in phases where they see appropriate, they may issue other measures. Indeed, the opinions do refer to other measures, in particular with respect to particular technologies being used for telemedicine services. The other thing is that there is a tendency for there, and particularly in this case, there to be a bottom-to-top approach. So here we have a lower-level agency on sometimes a commission or ministry regulatory measure or an opinion. You might even have just a standard come out without anything else. And then eventually you might get a development of higher level, say at the regulation level, even state agency regulation level or state council regulation measure, which in the legal hierarchy is a higher level. But you don't necessarily in China have to start out that way. And that's why we have, at this present time, opinions, which some may discount as a lower level guidance type document. But as it is the primary reference at this time, the authorities certainly consider this a very important measure. It's just that we might not, coming from the U.S. or the Europe or other jurisdictions, see this as as logical in terms of starting with a lower level measure and then perhaps in the future issuing higher level measures on the same issue. The other thing I would mention is that this is not unusual in terms of an opinion or something being issued and then later on the regulatory requirements become more robust and detailed. Taking an example from another technology area that is also following the same kind of phased track, we'll look at nanotechnology in China. We had definitional and other guidance standards issued early on over 2004 and effective 2005. There's still underway a lot of behind-the-scenes work on how nanotechnology requirements would be adopted into existing regulatory programs or even under new regulatory programs. More recently, in 2012, we had nanotechnology identified as a national significant scientific research area and therefore heavily promoted under the 12th five-year plan for the Ministry of Science and Technology. So along the same track, heavy promotion and then gradual refinement of terminology and what we expect, even in the nanotech area, eventual development of more detail. Also, a couple of last points to highlight for folks in terms of the Chinese regulatory system. Generally speaking, the regulatory authorities, when they initially draft measures, particularly at this level, are not focused on legal technology and the technicalities. Therefore, heavily focusing on whether they use the Chinese or even English translated term should or shall is not something that at the end the authorities are going to be really focused on, nor will that kind of thing make great difference in how they apply the law later on. As the laws evolve, that might come into more focus, but at this point, they're really not focusing on that kind of detail. And then also, clearly, when I talk about this bottom-up approach, I'm also talking about when you're dealing with opinions, it may be that some aspects of these opinions do not mesh well, to say the least, with other pre-existing laws that would be also relevant to our issue. And what do I mean by also relevant to our issue? Well, there are laws, for example, the law on physician licensing of China, the physician licensing examination eligibility requirements. There are implementing rules and management regulations on medical institutions. All of those predate this opinion. That doesn't mean that the opinion, therefore, is rendered ineffective through maybe textual conflicts with those older rules. It just means, and again, pointing back to the initial point I made, that these are new, and they haven't yet gotten to the whole idea of updating the older laws for consistency. Those are definitely in the plan, however, and it will be part of that phased development of this regulatory program for China on telemedicine. All in all, considering that the goal is to promote telemedicine in China, we'll talk a little bit later on the balance with also having to regulate that area, but understanding that they're promoting it is one of the positive points that we should take away from this discussion today.
Thanks, Tad, for setting the scene with the regulatory landscape. Next question is for Peter, but we're getting a number of questions in there too. So real quick, one of the questions for you, Peter, is how many pathology cases from China does UCLA field on an annual basis?
That I don't have the number on the top of my head. I would expect hundreds easily, but I don't have the exact numbers right now, so I apologize for that.
Well, maybe you got the answer to this question is how, from a U.S. healthcare provider perspective, and a lot of the questions here we're getting seem to be provider focused, how is just doing telemedicine in China different from telemedicine in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to pull it out because sometimes when we talk about healthcare, we have this healthcare lens that just colors everything. And so I'm going to pull it out in the sense that if you're any other company trying to do international business, if you're just a national, a domestic company, now you're going to go international. I think it's fraught with, many potholes and at the same time opportunities when you go international, just on how they do business, just like what Tad just mentioned. I think the key, and we know in terms of telemedicine healthcare, so first I want to be clear that I think when we're going international, there are a lot of lessons learned that we could take outside of healthcare industries that went into it. There are things when we really boil down to telemedicine, and that we've all experienced in the provider space, it is about coordination. And that coordination is key in terms of, again, what strategy you're going to go into or segment in the position that you're going to take. Are you going to take, if you're going to international business, are you dealing with a commodity product versus a high-end product? Because that's going to really change the different factors of getting the coordination down between the two different teams, China and U.S. I think one of the things that could alleviate that really changes is if you could create a predictable flow. And that's, I think, the key with working in China. And maybe it goes a little, I don't have the exact numbers on the pathology cases, but if you could do a predictable flow, then these cases won't be one-offs, and then that you can actually build it into the clinical workflow. For example, if I could have the physician say, Friday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., this is going to happen, so they could just knock it out one after another. It's a lot easier if you're just going to do a one-off, as say, if it's a primary care physician, they're going to clinic room to clinic room, and all of a sudden they have to stop that to get on the computer, bring that session up, which after if you think about it, actually takes more time than just going to another patient room. So I think if you could create a predictable workflow, that's going to be key. So just recap real quick. I think lessons learned from the international expansion experience of different industries. Second, you got to really, it's going to come down to the coordination. And if you could create a predictable flow, that helps alleviate some of these bumps.
Thanks. Let's move down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak. Tad, tell us about your perspective on the opinions in general. You know, we know this conference call today, it's not an autopsy of the telemedicine opinions. They are broken down in the translation, and we might do a subsequent, more detailed breakdown on all the angles of it. But you did, I think it was last week or the week before, have some in-person meetings and discussions with China's NHFPC. So why don't you share your perspectives on the opinions in general and your discussions?
Hi. Thanks, Nate. Generally, I think it's important for us to understand a few things in general, and it will help us as we move on to assess our projects in light of the opinions, and I think also in terms of the predecessor 1999 notice. The sense really from the authorities on why they're issuing the telemedicine opinions now, why the more than a decade and a half wait and then the issuance. Well, clearly the opinions themselves in the interpretation section and also in the beginning of the opinions reference plans, that essentially in those plans push very heavily for the promotion of telemedicine. They also suggest those reference plans and opinion documents, specifically opinions regarding the deepening of reforms of the medical and health systems, the 12th five-year plan for development of the health causes, and several opinions of the State Council regarding consumption of information, blah, blah, blah. Those more policy-oriented documents highlight China's efforts to promote telemedicine, but also suggest that technology in the telemedicine space serves an auxiliary tool role. Understanding those documents, it makes more evident why there was a policy push for issuing these opinions, but also speaking with folks who either work with or were involved in the drafting of the opinions, their sense was captured in the Chinese phrase, 时不我待. Basically, 时不我待 means time waits for no one in some interpretations, but it essentially, in the real Chinese interpretation, it implies that the enormity of the situation warranted immediate action on their part. They essentially felt they had to act soon in light of the push from the government to address the needs for medical capacity in remote areas in China in particular, but also their sense and understanding of the intensification of telemedicine-related projects on the ground in China, those which Jun and Peter talked about, and the sense that if you look at the 1999 notice, you'll see there was a heavy, heavy government role in a lot of the activities described under that notice. Well, just because that role is not as succinctly put necessarily in the opinions doesn't mean the government also doesn't see itself as having a role in the performance of telemedicine-related services. So essentially they said, we got to get these out now. 2014, September, finally got them through the approval process, and now we have this new measure that we're looking at. And I think it's important when we're looking at these new opinions to understand them in the context of the 1999 notice. That doesn't, you'll notice for those legal beagles who look at this, that the 2014 opinions do not explicitly rescind the 1999 notification or notice. It doesn't mean that eventually it won't be clearly rescinded once it becomes, this regulatory area is sufficiently fleshed out to make that earlier document innocuous. But for now, it's important to look at it in context. And as Nate mentioned, we'll be issuing some further analyses to help you parse between the two, where one might help inform the approaches for the other. But I wanted to make that point, to not just completely discard the 1999 opinions. The other thing is that in looking at the 2014 opinions and discussing these issues with authorities, understand that their starting point, not surprisingly if you look at each provision in the measures, is to focus their experience with the primary control entity for physicians and related medical activities. In other words, the medical institution. The medical institution, that term shows up everywhere in Chinese related regulatory provisions on these issues. It does not mean, however, that our understanding of medical institution and how the regulators for telemedicine address that term, that there won't be some evolution to cover a greater array of models than we might initially understand with regard to that. There are provisions on medical institutions. I would note that folks should pay attention to those older measures that I mentioned, the regulations on medical institutions in China, as well as the implementing regulations or implementing measures for those medical institution regulations, which provide some better sense as to the array of entities that they're talking about when they mention that, and what licenses they're talking about with respect to medical institutions. But again, keeping in mind that the authorities are also not yet focused on reconciling the 2014 telemedicine opinions with those older laws. So there may be some shifting to adapt and address existing models.
Well, it seems like what Ted is discussing some fluidity in the as the regulatory scheme settles. June, what was if you had to choose one thing when you read the opinions, what was that one thing that struck you the most?
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me the most is it clearly said in the opinion that non-medical institutions are not authorized to provide the telemedicine services. So when I first read it, I really don't know what it exactly means and what the implications to those private companies who are currently practicing telemedicine in China. Let me give you examples. Excuse me. There are a lot of companies in China nowadays using those mobile devices, such as your iPhone, your iPad, to provide those consultation services, like the company here in the States, Teladoc, Health Tab. So there's a company in China called the Train Doctor, which I have a slide on slide 6. So this company basically has contracting with physicians, and also I believe they also have in-house physicians to provide medical consultation services directly to patients. So were this affecting those private companies that currently provide medical consultation? They don't call this diagnostic service, they call it consultation. So were these opinions actually ban all this type of services? But in my opinion, I don't think so. For example, just in the past 2 months, and you will see there's an unprecedented amount of capital has been pouring into the homegrown mHealth and the telemedicine companies in China. Just in August and September, there were more than $150 million has been invested into those companies. For example, the companies I just mentioned, the Chunyu Yishun, which has received a $50 million investment led by CICC, which is the lead investment bank in China. So, in general, I think, the investment community are actually encouraged, by the opinions, which they see this is a good sign because the government is regulated means there's a lot of companies and business opportunities in this space. And then there's another, examples I have, which is a mobile app, help diabetic patients to manage diabetes. So this is a newly launched mobile app in China. And they also have contracting physicians to provide consultations to those diabetic patients. So how this opinion is going to affect those companies, I'm not sure, but I don't think the government is going to just simply shut it down.
Peter, same question.
Yeah, and I think June's absolutely right on what struck him also struck me. I'll take it on another side where I do see positives that the opinions are really protecting the patients and legitimizing telemedicine as an industry in China. I think that's very encouraging. When I was reading it, and maybe that's I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like once the law comes out, the business already moved 10 steps more forward. And how I read it was in the context of what we in the United States saw telemedicine, say, 5 years ago as well. We would buy these like $30,000 cameras and then set up a room so everyone goes into that room and then conducts a session. And where we are in the States already is, and then what June just mentioned with that latest round of funding with that company, is that we see this mobile production going out where just as mobile the patients are, we also think the physicians will be as well, rather than putting down some geographic location where everyone goes to. So I found that quite interesting, but also encouraging with the opinions.
Tad, the opinions themselves refer to a cooperation agreement, which at least under these opinions really seems to contemplate an agreement between two medical institutions, whether they're in China or whether one is a U.S.-based and the other is a China-based. What would be your maybe like top 3 recommendations you would have for a U.S.-based healthcare provider with respect to examining a cooperation agreement?
Well, as noted by our 2 other presenters, key here is coordination. I mean, for the parties, it's obvious, and now, for those that are thinking of developing a cooperation agreement per these opinions, obviously feedback and understanding of where the authorities are is important. But right now we know that a cooperation agreement, or the government has signaled that this cooperation agreement is central to any dispute handling and resolution under the opinions with respect to telemedicine services. So if the authorities get involved in anything related to the telemedicine program, initiative, project, etc., they're going to look for a cooperation agreement from this point on. And therefore, a big focus would be, as is indicated in the opinions, how do we describe the allegation of liability? That'll be a big focus. They, again, remember that they want to promote telemedicine, but also have a tendency to see problems and non-compliance situations everywhere. So the more clearly we address things such as, why we're cooperating, under what conditions we're cooperating, and the limitations on that cooperation, how the processes of telemedicine are going to be applied to the particular situation, the rights and obligations of the parties, understanding also that these new opinions differentiate between what they call as the host, or basically the host institution essentially, in this case likely the China Medical Institution, and then also the invited party, meaning the one that is providing the telemedicine consulting services, but which does not have the direct patient relationship. They sort of, at least as a starting point in these opinions, differentiate on that standpoint. And for us to flesh that out more clearly in the cooperation agreement, and also as not just the cooperation agreement, but to make sure that the invitation also fleshes out, what is being requested, because that's also a focus of the opinions, the content of the so-called post-party invitation for telemedicine consulting. Both of those are going to be very critical. They're going to be in the future, I believe, the linchpin of how the government assesses the cooperative project. We've developed several of these already, and we can go through those in more detail, but those are at least some key observations on this area.
Thanks, Tad. I liked how they kind of bridged the legal and the practical advice when looking at a telemedicine cooperation agreement in China. In that same vein, Peter, what's one of the best pieces of advice you can share for U.S. companies that want to get into telemedicine in China?
So, again, I think you first need to understand your strategy, know the assets that you have to deploy, and then position in terms of, say, your costs as well in terms of getting things done. That being said, you need to then segment and then position yourself. And I think there's an allure to China as, a big growth market, and absolutely, but I think you should conduct due diligence. You shouldn't just parachute a team right in. And I think what you're hearing, because there needs to be a lot of clarity, but really trust your partners. And I think as a provider, we've had experience and we built that over the years, and it gave us an entry that we could really de-risk that process as much for us, but at the same time being able to expand into another market.
June, same question to you. Oh, Ted, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on, the de-risking of the process is key here, because everyone on the phone wears many hats, I'm sure, if they're involved in China. One, if we are lawyers, we deal with the regulatory issues, but also largely we're risk managers. We're also business people. And the coordination between all of those entities, going in with eyes fully opened, along the lines of forewarned is forearmed, is always better in China. The parachuting in is always the situation that we usually see afterwards that creates a lot of problems. And also with respect to your partners, you've known someone, everyone, but that due diligence is also extremely critical.
June, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the advice I can provide is that so when you get into China market, you need to have a strategy first and also be patient. For example, especially for those providers who are going to establish a relationship with Chinese hospital, and it can take years for U.S. providers to establish a relationship with Chinese hospital. So yeah, be patient and also have a strategy. And also by echoing what Ted just said, everybody need to understand the risk. What are those risks? Those risks you can foresee, or those unforeseeable risks. So understand what are those risks is very important. Especially for private companies. By getting into another market, so understand the financial risk and also the potential disruption of your continuous operation in the state. That's very critical for private companies to basically explore business opportunities overseas, especially in China.
We're getting a lot of good questions in from the audience. I want to have us field some of those. But first, June, I wanted you to maybe tell us about the Tianjin 2014 telemedicine event.
Sure. So the Tianjin telemedicine event is co-hosted by American Telemedicine Association and also the municipal government of Tianjin and also the Tianjin Binghai New Area government. So Vasilis is actually one of the organizers for this conference. We work with our local partner in China, and also we work with the ATA here in the state to put together this conference. And we would like to create an environment or a bridge to encourage those who are interested in exploring the China market from the U.S., especially in telemedicine. So offer them a platform so that they will be able to go there and see, basically get some first-hand experiences. You may be able to meet some potential customers or potential hospitals who are interested in establishing relationship with U.S. companies. So that's the whole purpose for us to putting together this conference. And it will be held in Tianjin between October the 28th to the 30th. And there will be around 100 to 150 domestic exhibitors. And also there's some U.S. companies will be exhibiting at the conference as well. And at the same time, there are a couple of concurrent sessions. So we are inviting opinion leaders in China, which they're from industry perspective and also from hospitals to discuss issues surrounding telemedicine in China.
Thanks, June. So let's take a look at some of these questions from the audience. One is for Peter. Can you explain UCLA's analysis relating to provider licensure rules?
In terms of, you mean telemedicine licensure to practice out there? Did I get that right, Nate?
I presume so. I imagine the person is asking, do your doctors in UCLA, are they licensed in China?
Got it. So right now it's more physician-to-physician consultation. And remember, we started doing, we went through our teaching and research arms to get into China with the Zhejiang University. Currently, with the new CTI agreement, we will be providing clinical oversight. So they're going to go through that process. Working through the UC system, it's a longer process for us to get all of that and dotting our I's and crossing the T's. But we will be doing first physician to physician, and then going through the dotting the I's, crossing our T's to say, to do patient-physician consultations and then maybe some diagnosis. But I think that they need to, of course, with these new opinions, we are dotting our I's and crossing our T's. So we still need to do some work on that front.
So it does seem like in the U.S., you would have to look on a case-by-case basis as to the factual arrangement that you would have. You know, if you're a direct-to-patient type of arrangement versus a peer-to-peer. China does have medical practitioner licensure laws just like we have here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here's an interesting one. Oh, does someone else have a comment?
No, just Tad, just to mention that, yes, there are physician licensing laws. There's a statute. There are also exam eligibility requirements that also provide that foreigners can take part in the licensing exam. Of course, that means you're probably going to have to really bone up on your medical Chinese, but also there are management methods for foreign physician short-term practice of medicine, so in terms of a project-based approach for that. So there are precedents for different models that could be later on applied as folks, as Peter put it, start to dot their I's, cross their T's.
We have probably about time for one more question. Before then, I'd like to let everybody know that the code is MWYU. So that would be Mary, William, Yellow, Umbrella. MWYU is your CLE code. And the last question that we'll have time for is, it's an interesting one. It's with the simultaneous existence of an alternative, i.e. Chinese system of medicine in China, how does it affect telemedicine in quality and safety? This will be open to see if anyone has their thoughts on that.
I could give a quick shot at that. At UCLA, we actually have an Institute for East-West Medicine trying to bridge the gap between that. And I think there's promise in the sense that what our researchers are going to find. I think deploying that at a mass scale, I think we really need to be judicious and make sure that we're doing it the right way, that doesn't affect patient safety. But I think there's a lot of promise in that.
With that said, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today. You have the links for the China 2014 conference, and to the extent we had some questions in there that we did not have a chance to respond to, please feel free to email or call any one of the panelists, and they will be happy to field those questions. If you're looking for follow-up information regarding doing telemedicine in China, please stay tuned in the future. Thank you for joining.
And that does conclude today's conference. Again, thank you all for joining us.